Ashley spent most of her childhood in and out of hospital, but had her burns really been caused by a house fire? A sickening secret. Yelling out, I sat bolt upright in bed, eyes wide in fright. Another nightmare? Asked Aunt Rhonda, popping her head round the bedroom door. Yes, I trembled. I was 10 years old and had the same bad dream every time. In my nightmare, I was much younger. I'd be watching my dad snooze on the sofa when my mum would pick me up and carry me into the kitchen. Then I'd feel pain and terror before waking in a hospital with a nurse looming over me. I didn't know it then, but these weren't nightmares, they were memories. Much of my childhood had been spent in and out of hospital. At 14 months, I'd suffered third-degree burns to over 30% of my body. I had constant I attended a parole hearing. Mum wasn't there, but my sister Courtney, who I hadn't seen for years, was. She wanted Mum freed, arguing she'd been mentally ill at the time. She'd received help and attended classes on child abuse, Courtney reasoned. My mum's brother told the board that Mum could go and live with him. He said he'd ensure she would attend doctor's appointments and take her medication. It felt like the adults were saying she should be freed. Who was going to take notice of me? A kid, I wondered. Shaking, I stood up. I think Melissa should stay in prison a few more years, I said quietly, adding that I didn't trust her around children. I do not hate her, but I do not love her. Parole was denied. Courtney rushed out of the hearing in tears. Afterwards, I wrote to Mum, asking why she'd hurt me, but she'd never replied. Everyone at school saw the news. You lied about being in a house fire, some kids taunted. Others called me Scarface and told me Mum didn't want me. The bullying got so bad I took an overdose. I'd suffered depression and anxiety for years, but now I was at rock bottom. Struggling to cope with me, Rhonda let me move in with my dad. It was weird at first. We were strangers. Dad was a plumber and handyman. To keep my mind busy, he took me out on jobs. We bonded as I learnt to tile, lay carpets and fix up a house. One day he opened up about Mum. Melissa was a really good mother at first, but then she started acting strange, saying crazy stuff about Jesus and the end of the world, he revealed. I was thinking of leaving with you girls. He told me that on the fateful day he'd just given us a bath and settled us down in front of a film. He fell asleep on the couch and woke up to the sound of me and Courtney screaming. I ran into the kitchen and saw you in the oven, he said, welling up. I scooped you out, but your skin was peeling off. Then I ran to the car, put you on my lap and drove as fast as I could to the hospital. Incredibly, Dad's account matched the nightmares I'd had. Despite being only 14 months old, I somehow remembered parts of that day. Afterwards, Dad had been diagnosed with PTSD. I couldn't look after you, I'm so sorry, he choked. I understand, I soothed. It must have been a horrific sight. I tried to put my past behind me, and in time I fell pregnant with twins. Tragically, my babies, Mason and Alana, were stillborn. I was devastated. Why was my life so hard? Afterwards, my boyfriend and I split up, but then I met a loving man called Anthony, who I knew was the one. Due to the positive impact my nurses had on me, I decided I wanted to become a paediatric nurse myself, so I started studying for a science degree. In time, Anthony and I got married and had a baby boy, Brooklyn, followed by a little girl, Caden. When Caden was 5 months old, Dad sadly passed away at age 65. Dad was always honest with me. I said to Anthony, I missed him so much. It was another blow, but with my studies and 2 babies to look after, I had to short of simply failing to be a perfect mother. She went on to ask for photos of me and the kids and a second chance to be a bum. "No way," I spluttered as I read on. She asked about my husband and joked how the kids would know her as Gangster Granny. She'd even said that once she was released, she wanted to move close to me so we could build a relationship and go shopping together. "She's got a nerve," Anthony seethed. She told me things she liked to do, including cooking. Given she'd put me in the oven, it was beyond insensitive. There was no mention of taking responsibility for what she'd done. She did say sorry that she hadn't been around to raise me, but there was no direct apology for her barbaric act. Bizarrely, she'd seemed to think she'd get out of prison and we would have the amazing mother-daughter relationship. "She's deluded," I told Anthony, "and there's no way she's coming anywhere near my kids." I concluded that she must be mentally unwell. It felt like the only explanation. "I don't want to see her, but prison is the wrong place. She should be released to a mental health unit," I told Anthony. In time, I gave birth to another little girl, Jaylee. One day, when she was just over a month old, I woke up to find her struggling to breathe. When she stopped breathing altogether, I frantically did CPR. "Call an ambulance," I screamed to Anthony. For 30 desperate minutes, I fought to keep my baby alive, massaging her tiny chest and blowing little breaths into her. But I couldn't save her. She'd swallowed amniotic fluid at birth, which had caused intestinal pneumonia. I was completely overwhelmed when we laid our baby to rest. Yet, somehow, I knew I couldn't fall apart. "I've got 2 other kids who need me. I've got to carry on," I told Anthony. It's not been easy, and I often wonder why I've been given such a load to carry. I'm the girl in the oven who made headlines around the world. I know I'm so much more than that though. I'm a mother, a science graduate, and I'll soon be a nurse. But most of all, despite everything, I'm a survivor. In the blood, when notorious killers are locked away, what happens to their innocent children? We reveal the stories of 5 daughters who had petrifying parents. I'm so sorry for the devastation he caused. Long before he hit the headlines, Chantal knew how volatile her dad Ralmo could be. Chantal said, "My father has always been a monster. That is all I've ever known him as. When I was young, there was no monster under my bed. He slept next door to me." Her dad was able to get sole custody of Chantal when she was around 5, and she recalls him making her stand in the rain in her nightie, tying her to a chair overnight and forcing her to endure freezing cold baths. She also witnessed him killing their pet dog with a baseball bat covered in glass. Age 9, Chantal found the incredible courage to reveal the abuse, and Moat served an 18-week sentence for assaulting her. He was released from prison on July 1st, 2010. Just 2 days later, he began the shooting spree that would make him a household name. Moat shot his ex-partner Samantha Stobbart was suffocated with a plastic bag or strangled. Rader then sent taunting letters to police and the media. He went uncaught until 2005, when he was traced after inexplicably starting to brag about his crimes once again in letters. It was February that year when Rader's daughter, Kerry Rawson, discovered who her father really was. She was standing in her kitchen when an FBI agent told her the dad she adored was under arrest for murder. Initially, Kerry didn't think it was possible. Her dad was a church usher, a stamp collector, a Boy Scout leader. How could he be one of the most notorious serial killers in American history? But just 7 hours later, Rader confessed to being the BTK killer. In shock, Kerry began grief counselling and was diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety and depression. "I wouldn't say the words serial killer, not even to my husband," she recalled. Kerry wrote her dad a letter saying, "No matter what you may have done or not, you are my father and I love you." She continued writing even as, she recalls, the details started falling into place. Her dad's late nights at work, his very occasional temper, these were all clues. Now, in her mid-40s, Kerry has a family of her own and has decided to maintain contact with the man she had no idea was a monster. The result, she says, is conflicting emotions. While she continued to write her dad for 18 years, it was only last year that she visited him in prison for the first time. "I still love my father, and I wish he had never done any of this," she said. "My mum, my brother and I didn't know we were living with a psychopath. They're really good at hiding it. 95% of the time, he was a good, loving father and husband." Now 78, Rader is serving 10 consecutive life sentences and will never be freed. "I knew he had done terrible things." When she was just 13, Melissa Moore's dad, Keith Hunter Jesperson, told his little girl, "I know how to kill someone and get away with it." Another time he told her he had honked when driving by their local prison, saying, "Someday I'm going to be in there, but not yet." On a third occasion, Melissa says her dad claimed he had something important to tell her, but then backtracked, saying, "If I tell you, you remorse for killing Irene. God have mercy on his soul. Satanic ritual. Sister Margaret Ann Paul had dedicated her life to God. After joining the Sisters of Mercy as a young woman, she trained as a nurse and spent decades Baker's worst fears were confirmed when she found a detailed note in his trouser pocket outlining how he planned to burn down his brother-in-law's house before slitting his wife's throat and decapitating her. Chastain ripped up the incriminating evidence, but fearing for her life, Luann went to the police and recounted her husband's murderous plan. Detectives began to look into the preacher's background. They found he'd been in the same place at the same time as a string of historic arsons, and that his first wife had died in a terrible house fire. Chastain was hauled in for questioning and eventually admitted to murder. He later retracted his confession, but it was not enough to escape justice. The jury at his trial took just 20 minutes to find him guilty, and he was sentenced to life for murder and 20 years for arson. Fake suicide. When Pastor Matt Baker discovered the lifeless body of his wife Carrie in their bedroom, the Baptist preacher was quick to call the police. A typed, unsigned suicide note lay beside the 31-year-old teacher and mother of two, and when the coroner's report confirmed she had died from an overdose of sleeping pills, detectives concluded Carrie Baker had taken her own life. The Bakers appeared to have been a picture-perfect family, but Baker said Carrie had never recovered from the grief of losing a 1-year-old daughter to brain tumour more than a decade earlier. However, Carrie's family was suspicious and hired private investigators to delve deeper, and before long the facade of domestic bliss came crashing down. Someone had been making calls on Carrie's mobile phone, and investigators discovered it was Vanessa Balls, a member of Pastor Baker's church in Texas. When confronted, Baker admitted he'd been having an affair and had given Carrie's phone to his mistress. The investigators made another breakthrough when they learned from Carrie's therapist that she had suspected her husband's infidelity and had found crushed pills in his briefcase. Baker still denied murder, and the evidence was circumstantial, but that dramatically changed when Vanessa Balls was subpoenaed to testify in front of a grand jury. Under cross-examination, she revealed Baker told her he planned to kill his wife so they could continue their relationship. Prosecutors charged the pastor with murder on the same day as Vanessa's bombshell testimony. In 2010, he was found guilty and sentenced to 65 years. Vanished into thin air. When Janelle went missing, it turned into a 35-year mystery.